Hi everyone. Thank you for taking out the time to attend this webinar. I can see the participants, have at least some strength I can see in these uncertain scenarios. And since morning, there have been developments after developments, wherein the Chief Minister of Maharashtra has just now, a couple of hours before, announced very clearly that all private establishments except essential services have to completely shut down their premises. Uh, so I think without spending too much of time on what is the current status of coronavirus COVID-19 spread in India, we will just move forward to a couple of pointers in terms of what restrictions are in place and what the authorities are now planning to do. As per our assessment, there are restrictions, travel restrictions all across the globe. All international flights are completely going to be blocked. All those operations are going to be completely shut down forthwith on the 22nd of March. Of course, as far as India is concerned, there is indeed a very strict process in terms of any person who has been coming in from those locations which are impacted by the spread of COVID-19. In addition to that, it is now also now being observed that the authorities are expected not just the employees or individuals to report any symptoms, but it's also the case for the employers wherein they're required to not just spread awareness amongst the workforce, but to also ensure that employees are made to be duty bound to report any symptoms which they carry to the nearest designated health authority. Epidemic Diseases Act 1897 has been invoked all across the country. Almost all major states and the appropriate governments there have utilized the powers vested in the local administration to issue orders to the tune of closure of public places, of restaurants, of non-essential services related establishments, or asking, at least in Maharashtra, establishments which were being asked to allow the employees to work from home and maintain 50% headcount are now being asked to completely shut down operations until 31st March 2020. From a disaster management perspective, it is important that everybody is on guard. All employers are tracking almost on a regular basis through various sources which are available in the public domain any order which comes up in relation to workplace management. Currently, it is under a lockdown mode. I have to say that, I have to go on record saying that as far as Maharashtra, more specifically Pune, Nasik, and Mumbai is concerned, private establishments, except those which are involved in essential services, have to shut it down. Of course, there is some leeway which has been granted to manufacturing establishment, which can work on a skeletal headcount basis. So as we have been discussing and some of us have been interacting also, precautions and awareness, and I'm not just talking from the perspective that there is a lockdown situation until 31st March 2020. We don't know how the situation is going to evolve. We are not aware whether times are going to unfold where this disease is going to spread any further. We don't know at this stage whether any vaccine is going to be developed. The only thing which we can talk about is how to restrict the spread. There is a possibility that we are on the verge of entering the stage 3 of COVID-19 outbreak. So it is a very serious, immensely precarious situation for everybody, including the government. Steps are being taken, and I'm giving a very practical perspective here. In all the locations wherever a lockdown has been ordered, please do ensure that we are not living in isolation or denial of the fact that there is indeed a very clear order from the state government in this regard, especially when I'm talking about Maharashtra, for employers, for organizations who have operations based out of other locations such as Gurgaon, Bangalore, etc. Please be on the guard. Please keep a track of all the office orders which are coming in from the appropriate local administrative authorities. If at all there is any confusion on whether you need to maintain minimal workforce or whether you have to shut down the operations, whether at all any of your services could fall within the purview of essential services under the Essential Services Maintenance Act, you please reach out to us. We are happy to assist, but please don't assess in a manner wherein you can fall foul of how the authorities are expecting you to cooperate in these circumstances. You need to look at it from a more flexible standpoint when it comes to employees who are either asked to work from home, and if at all they are not able to work from home, at least for the time being, it needs to be a wait and watch scenario where you encourage the employees and ask them compulsorily to work from home or to stay at home, not to really touch upon or deduct or adjust their leave with the salary which is ordinarily payable to them. And I'm talking simply from the perspective of waiting it out till 31st of March 2020. And post that, one can reassess the situation. Of course, employees' responsibilities are also there, but given the scenario, if the employees are not coming on to the premises, it needs to be a continuous engagement between the employer, the management, and the workforce, so that there is no isolation just because employees are not coming on to the workforce. From a future standpoint, if the situation subsides, even then steps need to be taken. And from that perspective, I would advise management all across the sectors for all the employers to ensure that they should still have a contingency plan in place. They need to have maximum social distancing measures on the shop floor or on the work premises. It should not be the case that 31st March 2020 deadline is over and you just start calling in everybody. Have a contingency plan to the extent possible. Try to reduce the footfall in your work premises. I don't anticipate the situation getting, I would say, boiling down to a normal situation or attaining normalcy that quickly. We are just 10 days short of 31st March 2020. However, we have to wait and watch how the situation is going to unfold. Discourage employees to the extent possible from traveling. I cannot say that legally you can restrict anybody to stay at home. If they want to travel by train or by airlines, it is their call, but you are very much within your powers to then notify to the employee that if he is taking any domestic travel by train or by any other means of transport which is used by public at large, he needs to report it immediately to the management so that there is no confusion, and at least on a precautionary side, a 14-day quarantine is maintained on a self-quarantine basis by that employee. You need to have the workplace prepared, spread out in terms of lunchtime, have multiple breaks, avoid crowding at canteens or eateries or cafeterias. There should not be smoking breaks. There should not be any places where people can just come together and be too close. Regular awareness campaigns, either through electronic means or through telephonic conversations or through virtual conferencing facilities. You need to have also set up an emergency response team, helpline posters, as much dissemination as possible for your workforce so that they are also at comfort and you also have an assurance that your workers, your employees are aware of the circumstances and the seriousness of the issue at hand. Sanitizers, face masks, clean washrooms, and you name it. So anything and everything which would fall within the purview of maintaining the very essential basic hygiene is equally important. Please do ensure that people who have specific symptoms like heavily diabetic people, people who are elderly, who have crossed the age of 60, who are already sick, and who are somewhere on the verge of showing those symptoms, it needs to be mentioned and very clearly notified to those employees that they must refrain from entering the premises and infecting others. So communication needs to be brought out very clearly. And of course, in those scenarios, to the extent required, those employees who are sick and who are not in a position to work in a normal situation should be required, should be asked to avail the sickness leave which is currently standing to their credit. Of course, in Karnataka, there is a very clear notification which has come up. If there is any symptomatic employee, he is required to be mandatorily provided 28 days leave to undergo treatment, and which will be not in adjustment of his current leave entitlements, that is additional. Whatever the situation is, when it comes to remote working, when it comes to business continuity and contingency plans, please don't get caught completely unguarded. 31st March 2020 is just a benchmark. I repeat, it is just a benchmark. The government is only foreseeing that if we try to isolate, if we try to reduce, if we try to decrease the footfall on the roads, on the work premises, there is a possibility that social distancing as an objective can be achieved, which can very well decrease or prevent further spread of this disease within the community as such. Right now, if you look at it, majority of the cases are restricted to people with origin or with history of foreign travel. So from that standpoint, please be careful. Please be mindful of the case that you have to look at your policy. You have to look at your wage structure. You have to have a plan, a contingency plan. For anybody who is involved in manufacturing establishment, try to see and ensure that at least the non-core workforce, ancillary footfall is avoided. You try to streamline the operations. Please realize the situation that's something which has been going on all these years historically. Disruption and streamlining the workforce is the new normal for all the organizations. So please realize the situation. Please understand that this is an extremely serious situation. The government, the authorities, especially the law enforcement machinery, has swung into action. I can give you a live example in Pune. There are examples where crime branch personnel in Mufti in plain clothes are visiting the premises and asking people, the commercial premises, to shut it down. So to avoid, at least for the time being, in the next couple of days, not to take any advantage of any legal position, if you're not falling in the essential services sector, in the essential services ambit, try to ensure that you completely shut down your work premise. You can have a skeletal security staff who are there to at least be responsible for any law enforcement machinery personnel or representatives who are coming in to check what exactly you have done so far. But for now, just wait. Don't panic. Have appropriate communication means, hotlines, or necessary mode of communication with your employees, so that tomorrow, as and when the situation normalizes, it is also your responsibility as the employer to keep your employees abreast of the developments and not make it fend for themselves to rely on information which is there in the public domain. In terms of temporary shutdown, layoffs, as we have been discussing in the last couple of days, if you are shutting it down on your own and there is a layoff and you fall in the manufacturing sector, please be mindful of the fact that there are provisions in the law you need to comply with. Layoff in case of epidemics, where you can justify that situation is going beyond your control, or there is an order of lockdown by the appropriate government. There are provisions, especially in Maharashtra, where you are allowed to ask the employees to compulsorily avail leave which stand to their credit, and post that for a period of up to 45 days, you are mandatorily required to pay the workman category employees 50% of their basic and DNS allowance. That's the plan in terms of what the law would tell you to do when it comes to temporary shutdown or layoffs. For other locations, for other state jurisdictions, it is simply the case where all your regular workmen have to be paid minimum 50% of the basic and DA until the layoff is continuing. Of course, after 45 days period, you can ask or enter into an agreement or ask the employees for their agreement to the proposition that given the circumstances, if we have to retain you, there's a possibility that we can retain you only if you agree to proceed on leave without pay. So that is one possibility. For managerial employees, there is nothing under the law which would govern them. It is purely contractual. You can agree with managerial employees and communicate with them to take a hit on their payroll, at least for the time being. Don't have communication which will give an immediate assurance to the employees, whether it's managerial or non-managerial, that by Diwali or by Dashera, I will pay you all the differential amount which I have not paid you because of COVID-19. Try to be open-ended. If at all there is a management call that you want to give comfort to their employees that whatever has been cut off or deducted from their salary will be eventually paid to them. Be open-ended. Talk about it in terms of having an assessment in place as and when the situation is it seemingly comes under control. Another, in case of an extended lockdown, if at all you're not as an organization in a position to carry on with the work because of complete absence of demand, please be mindful of the fact that you take it in a more streamlined fashion when it comes to any retrenchment measures. Proactive headcount reduction should be something which needs to be assessed very carefully. Notification to the appropriate authorities, if at all it is a voluntary shutdown or retrenchment, has to be followed at all times. Please be mindful of the fact that there are reputational repercussions also. If at this stage, under any circumstances, you attempt to do anything which you cannot normally do, specifically when it comes to your employees being retrenched or terminated from their services, please refrain from doing so or think twice before you take any radical measures. It is a matter of time. Everybody is hopeful situation might subside, but knee-jerk reaction should be avoided. So this is an unprecedented situation. It is extraordinary. Nobody has ever witnessed it, at least in our lifetime, since the Spanish flu several years ago in the year 1918, when everything was locked down. There is nothing, there is not a single plan which I can tell you which will be foolproof from a legal and practical standpoint. There are changing considerations every moment at every stage. Take good counsel, take good advice. You have advisors at your disposal. If there is any business plan and if you want to run it past us from the perspective of whether it is commercially, legally, or from a human resource perspective viable, please feel free to approach. Economic conditions are such that there is a deterioration. However, you need to also ensure that, as I mentioned earlier in the slide 2, knee-jerk reaction has to be avoided. You need to have flexible options. You need to have a designated emergency response team, somebody who is keeping a track of all the developments. This situation is fluid, so approach of the management is also required to be fluid. Be reasonable in your dealing with the workforce. Just don't think commercially all the time at this stage. It is a matter of time, at least till 31st March 2020. So don't start thinking about how you can reduce the headcount at this stage. Even the Prime Minister as well as the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, they have reiterated the fact that if people are forced not to come to the office, don't deduct their salaries. So be mindful of all those situations. Just don't rely on the provisions which currently exist. There are also reputational risks. There are optical risks which will stare at you once the situation normalizes. It is equally important how you are foreseen or projected as an employer in these times. So this is more from an HR perspective, which I can tell you as a counsel. Take thorough, reasoned, assessed business decisions. You need to explain to the employees, you need to communicate and convey very carefully and very clearly on all the decisions which you take at present, so that there is no chance of any kind of confusion in the mind of your workforce. I think that's the end of the slides for me. Any questions, feel free to reach out. If there is any question which is currently there, happy to address that. So there is a question about whether there is any possibility or any provision which is currently in any state in terms of reduced work hours. Now, there is no provision which says that you can immediately reduce the work hours systematically. But given the situation, I would also interpret that in terms of maximum number of hours which can be worked by an employee at a workplace. Now, depending on how the situation unfolds, if at all you're talking about reduced productivity or reduced demand, one can assess on a case-to-case basis. If at all we are talking about clear communication, notice to the employees to work on a reduced capacity basis, and what repercussions it would have from the perspective of minimum wages act application for your workforce. So if you're asking someone to move out due to poor performance at this stage, I don't see any problem. It's not that what I wanted to caution you against is that don't use COVID-19 pretext to throw out people or to reduce headcount. Just because there is a situation where you cannot justify, any exit, and you use COVID-19 outbreak as a pretext to get rid of those people. If at all you have the necessary paper trail, you can demonstrate very clearly that there has been a very clear reflective actions on the part of the employee wherein he has not performed well in over the last few months. That is a normal course of action for you. So I'm not saying that everything is prohibited. Provided you have the necessary reasons to terminate somebody on the grounds of poor performance. No, so a company will not be as such liable from legal standpoint if an employee contracts COVID. It is not the case that there will be a prosecution. Having said that, if you look at the recent regulations under the Epidemic Diseases Act and you look at the contents of those circulars, it is a possibility where, despite the order being there to shut down the premises, if there is a positive case, there is a possibility of, not just because there is a positive case on your premises, because you have not complied with and adhered to the orders of the competent authority, prosecution can be initiated against the directors or the key managerial personnel for not complying with the orders under Epidemic Diseases Act. So that is something which is there, but you're not per se held liable for any positive coronavirus cases on your premises. No, so there is a question about whether you can terminate the employees or can you reduce the compensation. As I mentioned earlier, also in one of the slides, it is not the case that you can reduce expenses only through termination. I think at this stage, let's be very practical. Employees have nowhere to go. I don't think if we say that we are paying you on a reduced basis at 50%, or at least for managerial employees who are taking a 50 to 70% hit on their payroll for the time being, they will just move on. Yes, there may be cases where employee will say, I will resign and move on, and so be it. But it is not the case that somebody is immediately going to jump the ship. So the idea is for you to engage in clear dialogues with the employees, with the workforce, have a kind of discussion where you agree and communicate to them very clearly that as per the law, you are paying them what is minimally required for this period where they are not coming down to the offices, and if their work cannot be assigned to them, and it is on a reduced pay basis, but not the case that you are terminating them on an immediate basis to reduce the costs. Yes, so layoff of core role workers, workers who are on company payroll, that is possible for the specific period of time. And I'm talking about a situation where whether you have 100 or more workers, that is something which needs to be very clearly assessed. The moment you have 100 or more workers, you need to follow the process of layoff under the Industrial Disputes Act. uh, unless and until we can clearly justify that in this epidemic scenario, in the backdrop of COVID-19 pandemic, there is no supply chain, everything has been disrupted, there is no raw material which is currently in place. And that is the reason we are notifying and intimating the competent authority that we cannot carry on with our operations at least for the 2 to 3 weeks until we have the raw materials in place. So that is a possibility. However, as I mentioned, compensation for temporary layoff is something which you need to be mindful of. In Maharashtra, you can ask the employees to avail leave which stands to their credit, but post that, up to a period of 45 days or till the time the lockdown continues, you have to pay the employees the minimum pay which is prescribed there. Now, there's a question where it says production site to function at 50%. Is it only for essential products or for every production facility? So as far as manufacturing establishments are concerned, they have been given some leeway. It is not just for essential services. Manufacturing establishments have been given that kind of some exemption where they can continue, but with a reduced headcount. It is not absolutely necessary that they are functioning on for an essential service only. Even for non-essential items for a manufacturing setup, you need to reduce the headcount and operate accordingly. No, so if an employee contracts coronavirus, uh, no, so I don't think, I think if I understand correctly, there is a question which says if an employee contracts the virus, even if the company provides optional work area, given the incubation period of the virus, is the company anyway liable? I think there I would take a pause. I would say that the moment you have anybody who is symptomatic, this entire perspective of isolation wards within the premises will not work. The authorities, the health authorities have made it absolutely clear. It is quarantine, and quarantine will happen in only the designated facilities, designated areas. So it is not for the employer to create quarantine facilities or designated work areas for those people who have contracted the virus. Please refrain from doing so. Yeah. And just to add over there, only for emergency situations, for example, in a manufacturing setup where you have somebody who has now demonstrated symptoms and you are waiting for the health authorities to report on those premises, idea would be to have at least some isolation facility on a temporary basis so that measures can be taken immediately for that employee to be kept in that isolation ward until the health authorities are coming to the premises and taking the employees concern to the designated health quarantine facility. No, of course, promotions, cut back on budgets, pay hikes, etc., is something which is absolutely commercial. It is not something which is mandatory for you to comply with. Any increments which is beyond the minimum wage can be held back. So, to answer the question, all these commercial consideration that is for the management to communicate and convey to the employee that until the situation normalizes, we are putting a stop on any promotions or any increments. So, that is something which is very much doable. Even if there is a reasonable expectation on the part of the workforce to expect promotions at this stage or at this time of the year. So, but it needs to be clearly communicated so that any expectations on the part of the workforce is clearly addressed. In respect of contract workers, I understand the moment we say contract workers, uh, people who are contract workers in two sense of the terms, it's not just that people have been there on your premises for the last 12 or 15 years, and suddenly you say that because you have been engaged through a third party contractor, you are not somebody who is part of our workforce. Try to, ensure that from an optics standpoint, at least for such employees who have been there on your premises almost in perpetuity and not somebody who are rendering incidental duties like security staff or housekeeping staff, they can be asked. And in that case, you can, to the extent possible, invoke the force majeure clause in the services agreement you may have uh, with your uh, with your contractors, wherein you say that at this stage, I'm not in a position to avail the services, and to the extent required, if it is possible commercially for you to repudiate or end that contract, that can be done. But I would say tread that path very cautiously. To the extent possible, if some minimum payment can be done to act as a subsistence allowance for those contracted workforce, please consider that, although legally you're not bound to do so. So if an employee refuses to work in the field due to fear of getting infected, uh, there are options. Of course, you need to first explain the employee very clearly that how this disease actually spreads. It is not something which is immediately airborne. You can take necessary precautions in terms of personal hygiene, etc., wearing the necessary mask, using hand sanitizers, etc. But even if then the employee refuses to work, then in that case you can counsel, you can issue certain uh, written warnings for the employee, wherein they can be asked that if, despite all comfort being given or all assurances being given, if the employee is not reporting to the duty, then you can consider that to be an act of insubordination, because this is only based on some kind of conjecture, a panic situation, and he fails to report to work for a field duty. There's another question which says if an employer who does not want to close the office during the sensitive situation asks the employee to choose if he wants to work or take leave, uh, and is not ready to pay the salary for the leave days due to COVID-19 or cuts the remuneration. No, no. So I think as I explained earlier also, uh, during any epidemic situation, if you are asking the employee to come and the employee who wants to work from home or at least take leave because of the circular which is out there in the public domain, please exercise caution before you take any steps to immediately start deducting his leave. Of course, in terms of shutting down the operations completely is a different thing. But if the operations are continuing and the employee is not reporting for work because of the situation at hand, please be mindful of the fact that immediate reduction in pay is not something which you can take as a step. Assess this carefully on a case-to-case basis and then communicate or convey to the employee the measures you would take in these situations. Yes, the Maharashtra news is very much confirmed. There is no, second thought about it. There is a notice which is there issued by the Municipal Commissioner of BMC of Greater Mumbai, and similar circulars are expected to be issued by the local authorities across the locations which are put under lockdown. There was another question about some workers being there at hospital facilities, and there is a fear of those employees not reporting to work. Now, in that case, as I mentioned, first you need to counsel them. You need to make it very clear that this is not something which can be contracted just like that. It is not airborne. If at all they refuse to work, you can issue warning to them, written warning to them, because despite all assurances, if they are not coming and if they are not already contracted that disease, it is something which you can take up as a ground to initiate warning, not an immediate disciplinary action, but at least ensuring that you issue that letter, and if somebody fails to report for work, then you can contemplate action to the tune of reduction in pay, or reduction from his a leave entitlement, if at all that person has failed to report to work at a hospital facility. If there is a closure of operations, is the employer bound to pay full wages? No, so there are two aspects to it. When you say closure of operations, it is a temporary closure. And as I mentioned to you, it will be a condition of layoff. And for all the workmen, and I'm not getting into the situation or the number game here, whether you have 100 or more workers on the shop floor. But the moment as a commercial establishment, you shut down your operations temporarily, the layoff provisions under Industrial Disputes Act for blue collared workforce or non-managerial employee will get triggered. And in those cases, for Maharashtra, you can ask the employee to avail all their leaves, which stand to their credit, post which for 45 days period, you are required to pay them at 50% of basic and DNS allowance. Happy to address any other questions. Yes, of course, Rajasthan, these questions are there, especially for some of our clients in the cement industry. There have been these questions. There's a question about, is the news correct? So sorry, if I can understand clearly, are we talking about the Maharashtra lockdown announcement? I think as I'm giving the this presentation, there is a situation which is evolving in other states too. Uh, I can confirm very quickly whether there is a clear announcement or official proclamation by the appropriate government in Rajasthan to do a complete lockdown. But please expect similar orders, similar announcements from state governments all across the country. We have to draw inference from the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, where he is emphasizing on social distancing measures to be maximized. No, so we will be keeping all the IFCCI HR committee members posted on all developments, in terms of any potential lockdown situation for other locations other than Maharashtra. So that we will keep you posted, rest assured on that front, so that veracity and genuineness of all those circulars and notices can be verified, and then you can take a conscious call on what you need to do. Um, And there was another question about loss of pay. Now, let me tell you, you agree with the employees. Employees may be asked to avail the leave even if it is not an immediate shutdown of operations. If at all you are shutting down your operations temporarily, you can ask the employees to avail their leaves, at least in Maharashtra. But even then, if you agree with the workforce, especially the non-managerial workforce, that given the circumstances, given the uncertainty, can we ask the workforce, and it is all about effective communication, can we ask the workforce and they agree to have their leave adjustments done and function on a reduced pay basis? That is very much possible. This practice is ongoing across sectors where there is a clear agreement and communication with the employees to work on a reduced pay basis, so that immediate, I would say, termination or retrenchment or job losses can be avoided at this stage. So if there are no further questions, of course, I am at your disposal. Sorry, another question which is, there are employees on quarantine entitled to full pay? No, so if I gather it from at least one of the circulars which are there in Karnataka, it does talk about full 28 days paid leave. At least from the perspective of those employees who are quarantined due to having contracted coronavirus, please be mindful of the fact that you cannot ask them to simply have availing all their ordinary leave entitlements. There has to be something which is considered to be a special leave in these scenarios. So please be mindful of that fact. And I think government might in the future come up with some kind of a clarification in this regard, that for people who are quarantined on 14-day or 28 basis, have to be paid full pay instead of asking them to have the leave adjustment in ordinary sense of the term. If there are no further questions, I think I would request uh, no, of course, rest on WhatsApp, and I'm there just a call away, just an email away. You have my email ID. Please feel free to ask questions. I'm mostly working from home or on the road, but I'm available all the time. So please feel free, even if it is during midnight when you have questions. I know this is an extraordinary situation and we are duty bound to help you. So please feel free.